point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a meeting of the Brattleboro Energy Committee's Microgrid Working Group.
That's what it says up there.
That's what it says. There you go. I could have read it. It would have been easier. I want to start this off with an explanation for people about why we would have a microgrid working group in Brattleboro. And I'm going to start with...
Who's this guy in the picture there?
Oh, yes. This is Ralph Meima. Everybody knows Tom and me. I'm George Harvey. This is Tom Fennell. And Ralph Meima, who is an extremely knowledgeable doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Ralph Meima, who I will refrain from calling Doc, who is extremely knowledgeable on the material that we're going to be talking about, and he's a member of the Microgrid Working Group. But I want to start with why we want to have a Microgrid Working Group and microgrids in Brattleboro. Tom, why don't you put up the pictures? And
which picture?
That picture. It's right there.
That one there?
That one there.
I can do that.
And just leave it there because we can just go through the pictures one at a time.
Looks like a ship to me.
It looks like a ship, doesn't it? That is the USS Lexington, which is CV-2. It was the second aircraft carrier of the United States Navy. And the reason why I put that up is because Tom and I, as we talk about microgrids, say very often just about every ship at sea is a microgrid. And the Department of Energy defines microgrid in a way that says you've got to be capable of being tied to the grid or not. And in this particular case, obviously, the Lexington is out at sea and it is not tied to the grid. And this is an early picture. You can see the biplane taking off at the bow. This goes back quite a long ways. And the Lexington was so long ago that the gun turrets that it had, there are eight guns on that ship, and when I saw those gun turrets, I thought, there's no way those are 5-inch guns. And in fact, as I looked at the specifications, they were 8-inch guns. That ship was armed like a cruiser, but it doesn't matter. The point is, it had an oil-based power system which generated electricity, and the ship was pushed by a propeller that was turned by an electric motor. And it was very powerful for the time. I think it was about 250 megawatts. But one of the things that's interesting about this is that the old ships, if you look at the ships of the First World War period, usually they had huge billows of smoke coming out. They had switched from coal to oil. And this is operating as a microgrid off-grid at sea. But when it came into land, it did this. And what happened here was in 1929, there was a terrible drought in Washington State, Oregon, and the mayor of Tacoma asked that the federal government help. Herbert Hoover, who was the president at the time, directed the Secretary of Navy to send ships to Tacoma to help out. The Secretary of the Navy balked at the idea, but after a while he agreed to send the Lexington, which was able to put its 250 megawatts or whatever it was, I don't remember the exact figure, to use, powering the Tacoma grid, because the reservoirs in that area were so low that the power companies could not really provide 100% of the power that people needed. And the ship was tied up there for about a month, burning oil and putting that oil into the Tacoma grid before the rain came and there was no longer a need for it to be there. This is Microgrids 101. It's from NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy, what is it? Do you know?
The New York State Energy
Development Association? Development
Energy Research and Development Agency. I think that
Agency.
is. Yeah.
Okay. Microgrids are defined by the U.S. Department of Energy as a group of interconnected loads and distributed resources that clearly defined, with clearly defined electrical boundaries that act as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid and can disconnect and connect, I got those reversed, from the grid to enable it to operate in both grid-connected and island modes. Now, the following image is one that came from NYSERDA, and this was an image that I didn't like for a reason. It shows grid energy storage, biopower generation, distributed generation electric vehicles, home energy systems, distributed generation fuel cells, microturbines, energy storage, distributed generation switch.
A little confusing.
A little confusing. It shows a little bit of everything, but the one thing that I don't see there is grid power.
Yeah, well, you
Well,
see
there is
the
a
power
picture
lines
of
off
it
on the
there.
left there.
You see power lines off on the left, I suppose you do. But anyway, it shows the various things that can be on the grid. And the grid, a microgrid can include houses, it can include buildings of all kinds, industry, businesses. A microgrid can be as small as a portion of a building, a house. It can be very, very small. And when a person has a home solar system with battery backup,
It is, in fact, a microgrid.
it's a microgrid. Yeah, exactly. And here
Now, the
we
whole
see
purpose behind it is reliability.
reliability. Yep. Solar settlements. This is in Freiburg. These houses, which are they are apartment buildings or condominiums. I don't know which, but clearly they're bigger than house size, I think. But they have a lot of solar power on the tops of them, and I would imagine they might have even their heat supplied by those things. They may be.
I would expect.
Yeah. Here is a local place where there's a microgrid. A lot of people recognize that. That's the Brattleboro Retreat. Just to show you, microgrids have been around for a long time. They can be powered by solar or wind, as that previous one was powered by solar. The Brattleboro Retreat has had a microgrid which is powered by three generators. They're diesel generators, each one about 1/4 of a megawatt.
They've had them for a long time. They've had them
Pretty
pretty much since they built that place.
I don't know about that, but they have had them for a while. I know that.
So it's a whole
And
separate building.
Yes, it is, and they have organized them in such a way that they can detach from the grid,
Yep.
or they can supply electricity back to the grid.
the grid.
And they were able to get a break on their power prices from CVPS, which was the power company at the time, if they agreed to either get off the grid or supply power to the grid as asked by CVPS. And I
Which
don't
they
know.
agreed to.
I don't know, but I imagine they've got the same agreement with Green Mountain
imagine.
Power. This is a more, I think, cogent example of what a microgrid looks like, and it's in this particular case you just see it supplying a house. It's the house with energy storage, a solar array, and so forth. That house, though, could be a house, it could be a neighborhood, it could be the entire
Could we
town
have
of
a
Brattleboro.
town?
You could have a whole town.
Yeah, whole town.
Whole town. And that is one of the reasons why you need a microgrid. This is something that a lot of people in Brattleboro will recognize. That is the Whetstone Brook, which is usually about 6 inches deep at this point, and here it's probably about 10 feet. And this was during Hurricane
scary.
Irene. It is scary. If it had got much worse, it would have been much worse. But as it was, it did a lot of damage, destroyed a bunch of vehicles, including your car, Tom?
Well, yeah, basically.
Yeah.
My car was parked in the Elm Street lot and it got flooded.
Oh, dear.
There was a picture of my car in the New York Times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with the back of the car floating because there was nothing in the trunk.
Okay.
And I brought it, I had it towed to the mechanic, and
Yeah.
he looked at it, and his exact words I'll never forget. That's toast.
Yes. Well, anyway, this is what happened in other parts of Vermont.
Is this the Dover Road?
I don't know which road it is.
Looks like it.
Well, it doesn't look like a road at all, does it?
Well, the
It looks
former
like
Dover Road.
The former Dover Road. We have to protect our infrastructure, and the infrastructure that we've got is not just roads. It's also the electric infrastructure and the infrastructure that supplies water. What happens if the roads are cut off and the power is cut off, and it takes weeks, for example, to get everything back in order. The only way you're going to have electricity is if you produce your own. And if you have a renewably supplied microgrid, one that is not dependent on oil or gas being brought into the area, you can keep it going. But it's not just things like Hurricane Irene. This is a picture of the Carrington event, which is a super storm that happened in 1859. And it basically fried the entire, large parts of the U.S. Telegraph system in that time.
Which was the only thing that existed then.
In terms of electricity,
Yeah.
that was just about it. But if this happened today, according to
We'd be in
NASA,
deep-
we would be in deep trouble. And that deep trouble would mean that if our transformers blew out, and a lot of those transformers, there is no factory in the United States making them. They're only made in India in some cases.
I think it's Sweden.
They would have to be, well, wherever they're made,
Yeah.
they would
Well,
have to
they
be
make them
ordered.
in India too.
But if you don't have electricity, you don't have pumps to pump oil out of oil tanks into trucks.
You've got big problems.
You've
baby.
got huge problems. NASA said we could have our grid down for 3.5 years. It was the same week FEMA said that they had figured out that a successful attack on 10 targets in the United States, I think it was 9 grid targets in one factory, could put the American grid down for 1.5 years, and it was right after that that the dictator in North Korea announced that he had the ability to drop a nuclear bomb over a part of the United States that would shut down the entire grid in the country in much the same way that terrorists would. And there are a lot of people.
Technically, I think he's right.
If somebody put a bomb into that area, that's
Yeah.
not what they're saying is wrong. They're wondering whether he really has that capability. But they have analyzed what he said and said, yeah, you could wipe out the American grid for years by using one rather small nuclear bomb.
Exploded way up high in the air.
Yeah, and if you think about
Doesn't even
that,
have to hit the ground.
no, it would be way up in the air. And if you think about that in stealth technology and things of that nature, it's very easy to imagine that somebody could deliver something like that and you would never figure out who did it. Anyway, that is my display. I'm asking everybody to have a perfectly lovely week, and then I will shut that down. I'm going to go back to, or at least I thought I was going to go back to the beginning of this so that we'll have that behind us as we talk.
Great.
Whoop, that shut down. I didn't mean for it to have that
What happened
effect.
to it? My goodness. It's gone.
It's gone. Oh well, that's technology for you. I guess I'll just shut it down. Anyway, what we're talking about is microgrids and the fact that we would like to have such a thing here in Brattleboro. And there we go. That's better. The fact that we would like to have energy grids here in Brattleboro, and I'm going to ask you to address that, Ralph.
Okay.
Why are we here?
Why are we here?
Well, I'm not even going to get into that. But yeah, so a few months ago, the Brattleboro Energy Committee, the Town Energy Committee, decided to create a small working group to look at microgrids.
Right.
So that was where the proposal came from. And since then, we have met once, and we've reported back to the Energy Committee once at our meeting this past Monday.
Yes.
So we're still in our very, very early stages. But there are a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, this idea of, well, there is a microgrid in Vermont, which has been around since about 2013. And that's the famous Stafford Hill microgrid in Rutland that's owned by Green Mountain Power. There is a large solar array.
Never knew that one.
Never heard about that one?
No.
No, it's right there.
Yeah,
It's
I
on the
believe
old,
it.
it's on the old Stafford Hill dump, the landfill.
Okay.
And I think it's 1 or 2 megawatts. I can't remember the size, but it also has large storage batteries,
Mm-hmm.
and the power from those batteries can power the local high school as an emergency shelter
Yeah,
in
I
case the
have
grid
heard
goes
of this.
down, and
Yep.
basically keep it up indefinitely.
Yes.
And I know that there have been some expansions recently in terms of additional buildings and so forth being looped into it.
So they got a solar array and storage.
Yes.
My understanding is that array was 2.2 megawatts.
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's actually one of the very first microgrids of its type in the United States.
Right.
And so that's there. And ever since that was created, people in other parts of the state have been curious about building something similar.
Right.
A group of us went out there in, I think, 2014 from the Brattleboro Energy Committee and had a tour. So I mean, that's kind of been there in the background.
I was there.
And we had some people. Were you on that trip?
I think
With
so.
Michael Bosworth and
Yeah.
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 And so there have been some other speakers from GMP who've come here and so forth to talk about the idea. But I think one of the things that should be pointed out is that Brattleboro is particularly interesting in this regard because there is a lot of renewable generation here, particularly solar. At the north end of town, there's a 5 megawatt solar array that feeds into the local grid on the Ferry Road landfill. But then there's several others. And
There's a big one by the Holiday Inn.
yeah, there's a 2.2 megawatt near the Holiday Inn alongside Route.
The new Holiday Inn, not the
Interstate
old
91.
Holiday Inn.
And
Yeah, I
then
don't even know where the old one
we've
was.
got a variety of smaller ones.
There's some smaller ones as well. And I want to introduce some interesting numbers here that kind of put it into perspective. In order to do its part in contributing to Vermont's 90% renewable target by 2050, numbers have been figured out for every single town around the state. And the state agencies, the Department of Public Service, and then the regional planning commissions have looked at how much renewable generation is coming from each town currently, everything, biomass, wind, solar, hydroelectric dams, and how much more needs to be developed, how much more capacity needs to be developed in order to get to that 90% by 2050 goal, which, by the way, is not as ambitious as many places nowadays, but it was considered very ambitious when we first started talking about it 10 or so years ago. And the situation currently is that if we think not in terms of megawatts, but megawatt hours, in terms of actual energy generated, the current, these are fresh numbers earlier this week from the Wyndham Regional Commission, thanks to Marion Major for providing these. The current generation is about 12,750 megawatt hours per year. And that's more than halfway to the 2050 goal. So there's already a substantial amount of renewable generation in Brattleboro, 12,750 megawatt hours. And so the question is, if the grid were to go down in one of these catastrophic scenarios that you talk about.
Or a less catastrophic scenario.
Yeah, and we never know what the likelihood is. But let's say it went down just for a few days. If the grid were down for several days, and there was only backup power for a few very limited kinds of facilities, like the hospital and so forth, the loss of frozen food inventories and medications that need to be refrigerated and a variety of other things would be economically devastating.
Yes.
So just that alone, if you leave aside comfort, you leave aside telecommunications, you leave aside the ordinary conduct of business, those would all be affected as well by a grid outage. And the thing
You
is,
wouldn't be able to get gas for your car.
it wouldn't be able to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. And a lot of people wouldn't be able to get water because they depend on wells.
Yeah.
Even though Brattleboro itself, the core of the town, has a gravity-fed water system, but the
But that doesn't last forever either.
and the wastewater treatment plant wouldn't be able to function. I mean,
Yes,
there'd be a
there's
lot
a
of
lot
things
of problems.
that would crash.
There would be a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So the thing is, with all of this renewable generation already here, we would be fools not to create some way of storing it and using it,
Yes.
because the sun is certainly going to keep shining. We hope.
We hope.
And so that's why I think, if you look around the state or the region, Brattleboro would be a good candidate for a microgrid.
Brattleboro would be a good candidate for a microgrid, but from our own point of view, from the point of view of the people who live here, the ability to maintain business in the face of, to be resilient in the face of problems, banks would shut down. Businesses would shut down. As Tom said, that you wouldn't be able to get gas for your car. You wouldn't be able to go anyplace. I know people who go to the library to be warm.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have no other place to go. Well, they do have other places to go, but that's a comfortable place to go.
Sure.
And they go in there and read or whatever, and that's where they're warm. And we've got a substantial population in Brattleboro of people who either are homeless or are, I don't know what to say, marginally housed. But at the same time, we've got Putney Road, for example, which is got a large number of businesses, factories, warehouses, and so forth out there, which a microgrid based on the landfill could presumably power them so that jobs would still be operating and people would be going to work, and the gas stations up there would be open and so forth. So there's a lot of economic benefit to be had out of a thing like this.
Yeah, although in the case of Brattleboro, some of the really core emergency responder and critical care facilities are in the southern part of the town.
Which means that we need more than one microgrid.
Possibly. I mean,
That would probably be the most likely solution.
I think we figured out that there were, I actually looked into this. One of the questions that would come up is, how many feeders or how many local distribution circuits are there coming off the substations in Brattleboro? And I identified 5. And if you could provide power to those 5 feeders, you would, you'd first of all, the feeders, you need the feeders to get access to the generation sources. So the landfill 5 megawatt solar project is way up at the north end of town. And then you have to get the power from those sources to where it's needed. And if we were to go with all 5 of those five feeders and 6 substations, and we'd have to figure out how much power generation is required to keep them lit. It would cover from the north end of town all the way to the southern end of town, and it would cover the hospital and the fire department and the rescue squad. And
well, the hospital has its own
it does, yeah.
microgrid, although that microgrid runs on oil, doesn't it?
I don't know.
I think
I've
it does.
seen it. It's definitely fossil fuel.
Well,
whatever the hell it is.
here again, if you have extended outages, it will be hard to keep a fossil fuel powered microgrid going because you
can't get the
you got to
fuel.
get the fuel.
Do you know how long the hospital could stay powered in
No,
the
I
event
don't.
of a grid outage?
No.
Because in places
I don't know the number, but that's easily accessible, I'm sure.
Because in places like
known.
Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and Katrina in New Orleans, after 2 or 3 days, the hospitals couldn't keep going.
Keep going, yes. And the first hospital to get back into business in Puerto Rico got back into business because Elon Musk got a whole bunch of PV panels and batteries down there.
Interesting.
These are things where, the sun doesn't shine every day, but it shines. And if you've got a battery that can provide you with enough backup power, and fortunately these batteries are getting very inexpensive, you can have a limited supply of electricity going all the time, and a hospital can go. The Brattleboro retreat is powered by oil-based 3 quarter-megawatt oil-based generators, as I understand it. They would run out of power after a while, oil after a while. But if we've got a good leg up on having what we need in terms of generating, but in terms of distribution and backup is where we've got to move.
Yeah, and a piece of work that would need to be done. And not just on the back of an envelope, but really thoroughly by an engineering firm, would be to basically, look at the scope of or maybe a couple of different scope scenarios for a microgrid here, and then for each one of those, basically do a kind of bill of materials or a list of the equipment that would be needed, the batteries, the switches and reclosers, the software, the control systems, and also something that would reflect how much power curtailment, in other words, curtailment of loads would have to happen so that the whole system could function in the case of an outage, and put a price tag on those. And I don't think it would be cheap. I think the installation could be just as expensive as the materials. But how expensive it is would have to be looked at compared to what the
How
cost would be.
expensive it is not to do it.
Yeah, and I'll bet there are insurance companies that would consider that something worth helping to finance.
That's interesting. Green Mountain Power would have to be consulted, obviously.
Oh yeah, sure.
And they would be interested, I'm sure, in being part of this whole thing. I talked to Dorothy. What is her name? The
I know who
PR
you mean,
person.
but I
Dottie
can't think of
Schnur?
it.
Dottie Schnur. I
Yeah.
talked to Dottie Schnur. I've been trying to get Brattleboro to have microgrids forever, and well, for over 10 years. And I talked to Dottie Schnur, and she said, if you want to do that, that's something that we want to be part of. They want to be part of the design, I think, partly to cover their own interests, but partly because it just makes good sense for them to be part of the design operation, because this is something that I think is going to happen over and over again around the state.
You know, something I wonder about is, if you think of all of the pharmacies and grocery stores and food producers and distribution companies like CNS, all of them are carrying cooled or refrigerated or frozen inventory all the
Right,
time.
all
Absolutely.
And it has a big economic value. You know,
Right.
hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars worth
Right.
of
As long as you
value.
keep it cool enough.
Yeah, and they must have insurance policies for that
the
stuff.
time. Yes,
Because what happens if they're struck by lightning, or if they have a fire, or if the grid goes down or something? All that inventory gets spoiled, and you know, what's the value of it? And you know, the insurance companies probably give people premium reductions, or they give them better terms on their insurance policies if they have risk mitigation, if they've got backup systems, if they've got, you know, various different ways to deal with a situation and minimize the losses. So you know, there could be some financing from a source like that to help pay for something that would basically remove that kind of risk.
maybe we could talk Donald Trump into selling Mar-a-Lago and donating the proceeds.
I think we should turn it into a refugee center.
That's a good idea. We are coming up on our half hour that we set out as a goal.
Sure.
So we're going to be continuing this discussion, I'm hoping on a monthly basis.
Right, and in terms of sort of to-do items, I wrote a short description of the kind of microgrid I imagined.
Yes.
And I think so far I'm the only person to actually written that down. But I think it'd be great to have something like that come from each of the members of the committee.
Yeah.
So we can feed it back to the
Energy Committee.
Energy committee and say, you know, what do
Here
we do
is
next?
what we have got.
What do we do next?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I want to point out that we are doing this today at 11 o'clock on the morning of of Thursday morning, and this is the first Thursday in the month. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do this at the BCTV studio each month. But I also want to point out that people in the public can attend if we meet.
Sure.
And so we will try to keep on Energy Week. We'll try to keep people apprised of whether there are changes in that schedule, so people can come. The working group does not function like the Energy Committee.
Right.
In
Worth
that
mentioning that. That's right.
the meetings don't have to be warned.
No.
There are a bunch of rules that are covered, Energy Committee and other committee meetings, that the working group is not bound by. But I'm hoping that going forward we're going to be able to present the people of Brattleboro and the rest of the world, if they want to watch this, because it's going to be available on various media.
I'm sure there's people out there with some pretty good ideas to consider.
Absolutely, yeah. Ralph, thank you.
My pleasure.
Look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes.
And
I'll see you around town in the meantime.
I have no doubt at Energy Committee meetings. And by the way, anybody who wants to can come to the Energy Committee meetings too, which have been happening at 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the first Monday. But we are changing our site, so we're going to have to report where that is going to happen.
I
Also,
haven't figured that one out yet.
we haven't figured it out. Everybody, I hope you have a nice week. Come back, please.
You'll come back.
Bye.